Good afternoon, everybody. I wanted to wish you a warm welcome to the GCSP to attend this public discussion on the unexpected benefits of climate action. And just a few words of introduction. I will then introduce the speakers, and after their presentations, we're going to have a lively discussion, I hope. So to start, my name is Anna Brach. I'm the leader of Human Security Cluster here at the GCSP, but I'm mostly working on the intersection between environment and security, and in more particular on climate change. And the issue is really important, and I think that we all need to be really aware of all the issues that are involved in this, and how we can and what can we do about it. When we think about climate action, there are two things that come to mind. First would be to see climate action as the most important preventive action of humanity that we actually have to act on. We have to prevent all the negative consequences of climate change, ranging from increasing conflicts over natural resources, mass migration, health issues. This is really something that the prevention is really, really important. The second thing is the urgency of the issue. The IPCC report on global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius tells us that we have around 12 years to get our act together and do something about preventing climate change. This is really, really urgent. The next thing is that when we talk about climate change, very often for individuals, for organizations, for societies, we tend to think to see climate action as a sacrifice that you will have to change your lifestyle. What this discussion tends to will try to do is to show you how climate action actually makes sense, makes economical sense. So all the actors actually have the interest in participating in it. And this public discussion is the GCSP contribution to shifting the narrative from the doom and gloom on climate change to talking a little bit more in a positive, constructive way about climate action and how we can prevent dangerous climate change. So for this discussion, we have three speakers. The first is Mr. Nicola Nigli, who's going to give us a short keynote speech. He's a Deputy Secretary General at Republic and State of Geneva, and he works on reinforcing Geneva as a premier global hub for internet, cybersecurity, and AI governance, as well as for sustainable finance. And this is why actually I wanted him to be here with us, because he's going to talk to you a little bit about, this local government action and how Geneva can be a part of the climate action. Then for the panel, we have two excellent speakers. First is Mr. Alexander Verbeek, who's the founder of the Planetary Security Initiative. He's a GCSP Associate Fellow as well, and he was the founder or kind of initiator of this annual conference in Hague on planetary security, which brings together people from the policy world and from the research academia to talk about the intersection between climate change and security. He has a long career in diplomacy, and he had a position as strategic policy advisor in the Netherlands government, which makes him a perfect person to talk about connecting the dots between different issues, different challenges. The second speaker is Mr. John Moorhead, who's the president of Drawdown Switzerland, and he advises on sustainable climate solutions and their health, economic, financial, social, and environmental impacts. And he's actually now launching Drawdown Switzerland and ACT Tank to implement Project Drawdowns and other science-based climate solutions to reverse global warming in Switzerland and beyond. So he's going to talk a little bit about this project later on. But first, I wanted to give the floor to Nicolas.
Thank you so much, Anna, for having me, and thanks for being present here today for this discussion. I have to warn you, if I start coughing, I will have to feel apologetic. I had fever yesterday and even this morning, but I guess it's a bit what the world experiences. The globe enjoys that fever element as well, or perhaps not, but that's the bottom line. Just a few words to introduce this subject from my point of view and from the point of view of the State of Geneva. But to start with, I'd like to come back to something far away from Geneva, and very far away in time as well. I'd like to go back to the year 1959. At that time, President Kennedy pronounced a speech, a keynote, in Indianapolis, and came up for the first time with this point about Chinese philosophy or Chinese characters and the link between a crisis being both a danger and an opportunity. And that comes back very often. You probably heard it 1,000 of times. The two characters, Wei and Ji, together being essentially on the one side very clearly danger, but opportunity. The only problem is the US didn't really get that Mandarin interpretation properly, and so there is a bit of a misunderstanding. In fact, if you really want to make that point, you have to go back not to the word Weiji, the Chinese word for danger, but to Zhangji, if I pronounce it properly. The idea being that a danger can turn to something positive. That's how misunderstandings start, and that's how essentially ways of looking at things can get wrong. And I think we have the same issue to think about when we talk about climate change. And first of all, I'd like to challenge you, Anna, and I do it in the most gentle possible way. Here, you sort of, I can't quite remember the point, but you spoke about changing or reversing climate change or stopping it. I don't think we will be able to stop it, because, and I've spent 15 years in negotiations. You can't negotiate with the climate. What we can do is essentially to mitigate it, to prepare for it, and to work a lot on our resilience. That's, I think, what we can do. Unfortunately, we have already made too much of a damage to this ecosystem of ours. So the question is really, what are the unexpected benefits we can take from this limiting it? Hopefully we can still do that. And that requires, and I fully agree with you, very, very urgent action and different thinking, different paradigms, and how can we essentially get something good out of it. And to me, it really starts with this Holy Trinity. On the one side, we have regulators, governments, rules and standard setters. Then we have people in finance who are essentially, on the one side, measuring risk or financing ventures. And then we have us, all clients. If the three start aligning, if that whole trinity starts thinking differently, there will be a change, very clearly. And I think it starts to happen. When I look at how finance starts to evolve, how ESG and ESG plus criteria start to evolve, how financial centers start not just to compete with each other, but also to cooperate with each other through mechanisms like the Financial Centers for Sustainability, which is now housed here in Geneva, a new international secretariat. There is very clearly hope, but we need to get so much further. I think another unexpected benefit of that climate challenge we have to overcome and to manage is very clearly the thinking on inequality and on institutions has to be getting much deeper. I think social scientists and economists have very clearly written about and eloquently theorized about how institutions and the inclusiveness of them has a big influence in terms of inequality management, but also long-term development trajectories. Very clearly, we need to go much further on that front. Circular economy is something, in my opinion, which will grow tremendously in the years to come. Any clue how many % of resources globally are reused, recycled at the moment? Who wants to guess?
Single digits?
Yes, you're right. Very well done. 9%. 9%. The Netherlands, for instance, and I just give you an example, is at the moment recycling plastic bottles and doing cycling ways with it. I love to cycle. I think you can't preach something and not do it yourself. This is brilliant. We have a plastic problem. Let's solve it while at the same time promoting a different sort of transport policy. This is the sort of thing we need to do. Second, we need to start working together and thinking about solutions in a holistic manner. And this is where Geneva really can provide with an amazing platform. Why would international organizations or businesses or civil society or think tanks like the amazing GCSP do things together on their own? We need to start working together. There is this fundamental need now to create new types of alliances, not just platform economies, but also possibly tomorrow platform governance mechanisms. And that's where Geneva really has a very substantial role to play, in my opinion. Again, just one example, and I come up with it pretty often, so those who hear me on a regular basis, apologies. Sanitation economy. 2.3 billion people on this planet have no access to decent toilets. 4-some billion people have some access to it, but it's really, really bad. And this touches women and children so much more than men. So here again, there is a big problem we have to tackle. It has tremendous implications on health strategies, on development strategies, and on people's lives, essentially. Geneva hosts the Toilet Board Coalition. This is, to give you just an example, Firmenich not doing great perfumes and aromas anymore, but doing reverse engineering to take bad odors away. And then they combine with philanthropy, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the WHO, some other multinationals active in health, and the startups active in IoT to create sensors. Together, they reinvent a global economic sector with tremendous potential, but at the end of the day, most importantly, tremendous capacity to change the lives of people for the better. And I would like us to essentially start thinking here in Geneva about multiplying these sort of examples. That's, I think, what we need to do. Last but not least, and I'm going to stop here, I think we really have an opportunity here to rethink about how we educate ourselves. Not just children, not just adults, everybody across the whole life. The 21st century is going to be a century where everybody has to keep on working on her or his education. Fundamental. And we have to think much more creatively. I think also we have to reinvent some sort of an intergenerational New Deal. And I think we have to listen to our kids so much more. We have to, this young girl now from Sweden, you've probably heard about her, Greta Tunberg, who's essentially launched this strike action in schools. But for one who has done amazingly well, and I applaud the example she's giving, I think there are so many more. We have to listen to so many more kids with brilliant ideas, and I think we have to find a way to give them a voice. If we can do that and reinvent how we think across generations, I think we will have done something tremendously positive out of this very big challenge indeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicola. It was really a perfect introduction to this discussion. I will now give the floor to Alexander.
Thank you, Nicholas. I didn't hear any coughing up till now. Unfortunately, the picture you paint of the world that is coughing, unfortunately, we hear that more and more, and however much I hope that your coughing will stop soon, I'm not sure if the coughing of the world will stop. We will see dramatic impacts of climate change soon to happen. The same financial top people that you just mentioned, they meet right now in Davos, and I ended my intervention yesterday, for those who were here, referring to the risk report that just came out, where these people that flew in with their private jets, as I didn't fail to remind you on, 1,500 of them, they see climate change and the lack of climate change policies, both on the mitigation and the adaptation, now as their top priority, both in the likelihood that it will happen and on the impact that it's going to happen on risk in the planet. But that brings up the question, what kind of risk are we talking about? Is it the risk for their investments? Or is it the risk that they cannot go skiing anymore because there's no snow on the beautiful ski slopes not too far away from where we are now? Or is it the risks of the individual people? And that's why I stopped yesterday when I spoke about the human security, where I said, you know, a girl of 8 years old digging for cobalt for our smartphones in the DRC, she doesn't care if her life is miserable because of warfare or for climate reasons or for iPhone reasons. I don't want to mention one brand here, let's say smartphone, Apple is doing its best. She experiences a miserable life. And that is, so for that girl, risk is something else than for that CEO in his private jet. And so when we talk about climate change, everybody has another kind of image. Some people think about, you know, the dying ice bear or something else. So when we talk about these unexpected benefits of taking climate action, you have to start, of course, with that personal experience of what climate change is. For me, an image I would like to paint of what climate change is, and I'm referring here to an article in the Guardian that came out just I think last year about a project. It's called Children Under the Sun. This in Malawi, and in Malawi lives this girl, Fatima Musa. I had to look up her name for a moment. Fatima Musa, she's 16 and she's pregnant. And she's one of those many child brides in Malawi, which is something that is directly related to climate change. They give, for instance, the example of Natanya. Natanya is a girl of 13 years old, and she has a child, and that is because of climate change. How does that work? Her parents worked in the fields in Malawi, and because of climate change you have increased flooding, and the latest flooding completely washed away the fields where they earned their living. they were left without an income. The tiny little amount of money they can make is just by finding firewood and trying to sell it. And they had two older girls, and they were married at the age of 18, and they had some education. But then they had, apart from Natonia, two younger kids. There was just simply no money to feed them. So when an older man came, an old man, not even older, an old man came in the village, and he offered an amount equal to 25 euros to marry her. Marry is a strange word for pedophilia, I would say, but to marry her, the parents had simply no other option than to marry her off, which had one less mouth to feed, which had the 25 euros that at least for a couple of months they could keep the other kids alive. So now she has a child on her lap and sees other kids still go to school, and she won't have an education. Now, studies show that children that are very early getting children, they will on average get about 5 children. Whereas if girls have an education up till the age of 18, they will on average get 2 children. So climate change contributed largely to this problem, but it's also, if you take the right measures, like educating girls, you actually do something about climate change. Much less children in the world, better educated children, more stronger, more connected, more integrated women in the world that can play their role. And that is the kind of picture I want to show you when you talk about the risks of climate change. I really feel for the polar bear, but these are the kind of images where I think of. So if you take climate action, you contribute to reducing these horrible numbers. We now talk about only in tiny Malawi. Look on the map of Africa, and if you start writing Malawi, the I ends somewhere in Madagascar or somewhere. It's a small country compared to those other 50 countries in Africa. We talk about 1.5 million girls that are at the risk of being married because of these climate change impacts. That is the scale and that is the misery that we're talking about. So anything you do about climate change, if you take some measures, you can even save one of them. That's already a good thing. So now I was going to talk about positive things, right? And I start here. I just want to make sure that we all are on the same page what we're talking about. Let's start here. This meeting started actually with this cartoon, because John and I and Anna, we were talking about this famous cartoon. You've probably seen it a dozen times in many years. I don't really know. Joel made it. Credits to Joel. I can't read the surname there. This gone around on the social media for many years. So you got this scientist saying all the positive things that climate action will lead to. Then you have this kind of Trumpy guy without his red hat who is saying, what if it's just a big hoax and we created a better world for nothing? And shall I take another microphone? Not a microphone? It is a microphone. Shall I take yours? So these are the kind of, this is better, eh? So these are the kind of positive benefits you can talk about. So last Sunday I was thinking about, okay, what am I going to tell you today about these positive things? And what I did was I sent out a tweet. I got some followers on Twitter that like environmental issues. So I said, can you help me? I think I maybe have a slide of that as well. No, I don't. Those are the answers. But so I sent out a tweet and I said, can I have just half a minute of your time? And can you help me with what is the first thing that comes to mind when you talk about the unexpected benefits of climate action? Basically, any speech that I'm giving today is their speech because I'm referring a lot to what they did to work for me. I just have to translate it here. So what I had expected were things that were like, the kind of things you see on the screen, like more green jobs and more renewables, things that you can measure that. We can measure that we get cleaner air if we burn less fossil fuels and that we therefore get maybe less children with asthma and those kind of things. But overwhelmingly, the reactions that came in, and if you go to my Twitter account, Alex_Verbeek, you can see the reactions. There were like more than 100 reactions that came in. And overwhelmingly, it was something else. It was much more about the moral dimension of taking climate action. Let me give you some examples. I wish I could show you all of them, but you can see them. I'm not sure if you can read it. I'm not sure if I can read it actually from here. But these are the kind of things that came out of it. Bring all of humanity closer together. And things that at least we have to show that we believed in the science and we tried our best to save the planet. Whether we will succeed or not is just the right cause to work on. And that all living things are really connected. We're in this boat together. You know, that kind of feeling. More peace and understanding, uniting worldwide for a common cause. Somebody in the middle at the bottom referred to the President of the United States. No tweets like this. He referred to a tweet that just came out saying that we would need global warming because it's so cold in America. No further comment. And this is the last one I have. Just a few more. Read it for yourself for a moment. The one on the right is interesting. Mike Eamon. Thank you, Mike, if you're watching, which you told me you would probably do. It's the former Prime Minister of Aruba, who also referred to Kennedy, not on his 59 speech, but this is on his speech about going to the moon, because that is just a challenge that we are willing to accept. And that is so relevant. I'm happy with that remark. This is a challenge that we're willing to accept because there is basically no alternative. The world is rapidly warming. The 12 years to stay between the 1.5 degrees that you mentioned is too often given the interpretation like, well, we have to think now for 12 years before we actually start doing something about it. No, it is we have to start yesterday to rapidly build down the greenhouse gas emissions that we are sending out, and then we might just make it, but we really have to make miracles if we want to do it. But hey, you know, flying to the moon, wasn't that a distant dream, you know, like Jules Verne, etc.? This absurd idea that you could actually go there. Well, I was just 4 years old, and they were already walking on the moon, and it's already a distant past. We were able to do that if we really work together and go for it. Isn't that a beautiful thing? So I thought those reactions were very interesting. So this moral dimension. What are we doing here, you know, sitting in this beautiful room in this beautiful city of Geneva, etc., while at the same time people living on small island developing states are losing their land, their heritage, or even losing their state in a few cases because of rising sea levels. And the people in the deltas of the world that are now confronted with rising sea levels and salinity of the ground, etc. And let's take the nomadic herdsmen in the Sahel region that are now in competition with the farmers for the ever year more reduced amount of fresh water that they have either for their goats or for their crops. These are, if you turn that around, if we take climate action, if we reduce that impact, that is the kind of things that we get out of it. And we have to do all of it, because whenever you talk about climate change, you talk about equality and you talk about, inequality mainly, you talk about how unfair the whole thing is. That we in the rich countries have been able to build up our economy in the past 250 years by just recklessly putting all the waste that we have in the atmosphere, which then impacts the countries in the south that have practically contributed nothing to it. Well, some of them do now, and some of them even now still don't. Whereas we have the capacity to work on the adaptation of the problems that we are facing. I live in Stockholm, just next door. They are already working on the expected sea level rise and doing huge construction works at Slussen, for those who know Stockholm. And on top of that, the impacts that are taking place, the impacts that are expected, that are already there, are so much more in those countries in the south that never contributed to the thing in the first place, and that are not able to adapt. So it is very much about that it's not fair, but even if you would only think about your own interest, it's not a wise decision to deny the problem. Climate change is, the reaction is often a bit like, suppose your house is on fire and you just, you jump on your bed, you put your pillow on top of it so you don't hear anything, you don't smell anything, you don't see anything, and you just hope that the problem goes over. Whereas you should have been able to predict that someday your house might catch fire, and you should have prevented that from happening. And you could have prepared by cooperating with your neighbors, that if someday your house starts to burn down, that together you work in putting that fire out. And now we are in that situation. It was predicted. The oil companies had the best experts in the world. In the 1970s, they knew exactly what was going to happen. And instead of warning, which I guess all of us would do if you see that a house catches fire, you warn, at least you call the fire department. Well, they first decided not to warn anybody, and then actually they took the decision to send out the wrong messages, the disinformation campaign, to create confusion. No, the house is not burning, it just looks like that, but the scientists do not really agree yet whether this is real burning or just, a fire. And then in the 1980s, all those climate experts in the world, with relatively limited data in those days, that were not working for the oil companies, they came out and they warned, and they spoke in the parliaments of the world to inform anybody in a position of power what was going on. And then we kind of denied it, and we didn't take any action, and we didn't prepare. So now we are in this situation. And now that we all have seen in the past summer that the complete Northern Hemisphere was basically one huge heat wave, now that everybody is really getting concerned about what is going on, now that the young people, including an unlikely leader like Greta Tunberg, who's doing an excellent job of warning the world that the younger generation is completely fed up with our generation, now we are starting to take action. And how beautiful is that? And that is very much what these reactions were about. It is a beautiful thing that finally we rise up to this challenge, and that we united start to work on this, because this globe has become so small. It is so globalized. It is globalized by communication, by transport. It's also globalized in the environmental damage that we are causing. And worldwide, we are taking exactly the wrong reaction. You see nationalism rising up. No, you need globalism. You need to be open to the world around you and work together. And I think there's a huge gap in our democratic institutions, in the way they function, if I see so many reactions appearing on Twitter of people saying, let's do this together, we can do it, it's proven that we can do it. The Drawdown project is one of those examples, and John will talk about that we can actually do it with the present technology that is already there. Our governments should get to action. And yes, there are a lot of positive things going, and I could talk about for hours about that. but it's not enough. We need to speed up. So if I look at the kind of top 10 benefits, unexpected benefits of taking climate action, I think this moral dimension that we can rise up to this challenge is my number one. But I want to mention a few other ones.
If we take the question that's before us, it's actually a two-part question for me. First of all, there's the unexpected benefits part. But the other part that's very important that we need to define in that question is the climate action that we need to see. So I'm going to address both parts. I'm going to start with what's the climate action that we need. So I like very much this visual. I don't know how well you can see it, but these two visuals, they come from a recent scientific study that was published, and it helps us answer the question of why climate action has to be to stay within 1.5 degrees and not 2 degrees. And a way of expressing that is to avoid these tipping points into what is described in the scientific paper as hot house Earth. And so if you can see our planet as it sits originally in that space which David Attenborough describes as the Garden of Eden. It's not too warm, it's not too cold. It allowed for our civilization to develop. And you can see that that track is now going towards the left. It's getting warmer. And the risk that we have, as Al Gore expresses it very well, is that we're going to lose the grasp of our planet. And it's going to fall into hothouse Earth. When at that level, the climate change will just accelerate more and more, and it will be completely uncontrollable. We know we're leaving the Holocene, and we're coming into the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene is this period of time that we're in, which humans are dominating. And so, just to mention a couple of the tipping points, that if we go as close to as 2 degrees warming that we risk triggering, there are things like the melting of the Greenland ice cap and melting of permafrost, which leads to more and more global warming. So the good news, though, is that there's not one, there's not two, there's not three, there's actually 5 plans of how we can do this, how we can stay within 1.5 degrees. So I'll talk a little bit about those first, and then we'll talk about the unexpected benefits. And please do interrupt me if you have questions or you want me to clarify anything in particular. So the first one is Project Drawdown from Paul Hawken. So this is an effort. So all these plans are science-based. Over 60 researchers were basically tasked with going out there and finding what are the solutions to reversing global warming. And they went through all the peer-reviewed literature from their own experiences as well as researchers, and they mapped and measured and modeled what were the most substantive solutions to reverse global warming. So what global warming is, what reversing is, I don't know if you can see this, I don't think this, I can't use the pointer, but if you see, this is the increase of the concentration of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. And you can see that it's going up dramatically. Who knows why it's always like a seesaw? It's that we have each year. Yes, it's because of the seasons and the northern hemisphere. When the vegetation comes round, the concentration drops, and then it goes back up again and so on. But it's going up. So the point of drawdown is the point in time when we will start decreasing the concentration. So it's in green here. And it's when the atmospheric greenhouse gas concentrations start to go down on a year-to-year basis. We may have reached 1.6, 1.7 degrees warming, but the moment that happens, it'll start going down. And the way to do that, of course, is to stop the emissions or reduce them dramatically, and on the other hand, start sequestering through natural climate system, the climate solutions, sequestering the carbon, so that we start to draw down from the atmosphere greenhouse gases. These are 100 solutions. As you mentioned, there are 80 of them that have been modeled in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions that they reduce. What are the net savings and what are the net costs for those 80? And here we can see that drawdown has now been translated into French and German, Dutch, Portuguese, and there will be versions in Spanish, Chinese, etc., and Cantonese. The second one is the Exponential Climate Action Roadmap, which comes from Professor Rockstrom at the Stockholm Resilience Institute, came around with what he describes as the carbon law, which is that we need to have emissions every decade. And it's based on that, and the Exponential Climate Action Roadmap proposes that we do that for energy supply, industry, buildings, transport, food consumption, agriculture, and forestry. And the approach there is to, in this more positive narrative that we're coming into, is not to tell people what not to do, but tell people more what they should do, and favoring those technologies that are carbon-free or very low carbon. And so the exponential growth that will come from those solutions are the ones that are going to mean that we'll be able to cut those emissions. And it comes, there are plenty of drawdown solutions that are actually included in this exponential roadmap. So that's one of the plans, and it's till the next decade, so that's also important. Drawdown is out to 2050, over 30 years. This is very concrete, and it's for the next 10 years, 11 years. Another one is the Solutions Project that comes from research from a group that's headed by Mark Jacobson at Stanford. And he's come up with the 100% renewables and basically the electrification of everything, sometimes in hybrid mode with hydrogen that comes from electrolysis, which is produced cleanly. And he published a paper which demonstrates how we can get to 100% renewables, 139 countries, and electrify basically all different types of industry by 2050. And it's focused on fossil fuel substitution and so on, and the work of over 85 researchers over 10 years. And this has just come out. It's a team at a university in Australia, and it's supported by the Leonardo DiCaprio, the DiCaprio Foundation, that also supported Project Drawdown, and they've just published the One Earth Climate Model. And you can see what I've just been describing in terms of what needs to be done in terms of reversing global warming, is that you see in gray, that's basically the emissions from fossil fuels and cement, and that it needs to come down dramatically. And what's under the curve, what's under the zero, is negative, and that's favoring natural climate solutions. So that's where, in their case, what they've done is using very sophisticated computer modeling and running different simulations, they also, and that's what's interesting, is that all these science-based plans are all researched and are reinforce each other. So they also, their research shows that we can get to 100% renewable energy by 2050. Protection and restoration of 50% of the world's lands and oceans is also needed, and a transition to regenerative agriculture. All of this by 2050. And last but not least, by any means, is the recently published report by the IPCC that is based, of course, on all the researchers that participated in that work, and all the scientists. And the reason, though, that I've also put it last, as it were, is that if you look at, and so this is in a very summarized form, what are the 5 steps to 1.5 degrees that was published on the BBC. You have the global emissions of CO2 need to decline by 45%. The renewables are estimated to provide up to 85% of global electricity by 2050. Coal is still expected to be in the mix in 2050, and they rely very much on something that's called BECCS, or energy crops, which is bioenergy, carbon capture and storage. And there's a lot of questions. You evoked the moral and ethical aspects. Okay, so just a few more minutes. Okay, so anyway, all of these 5 plans mean that we can stay if we do all of these things. Now, this is, of course, a massive undertaking. It's a huge transformation of how we transport ourselves, how we work, and so on and so forth. But I just wanted to pick some examples, and this is where Nicolas as well, this fits in perfectly, of course, with La Genève Internationale that we are, and the sustainable finance, la finance, qui est on the other side of the lake. So we have human rights and SDGs, for instance. It's all about human rights and SDGs. I'll just mention two of the Drawdown Solutions, one of which is the indigenous people's land management and educating girls, as 2 examples which obviously have very much to do with human rights and SDGs and contribute to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and carbon sequestration. So on the financial, I just have some examples. So Drawdown says that we can save 74.2 trillion at a cost of 29.6 trillion. Now, I just wanted to use 2 examples. One is solar farms. So on the left, we have the 5.02 trillion. Now, those are the net savings, right? And the net costs are negative, which means that actually, over 30 years, we will save 80 billion by doing solar farms rather than fossil fuel powered energy. This is very impressive, but to come back to what Cristiana Figueres said about the vested interest, if you look at the number of the savings, the 5 trillion, that's money we're not spending on fossil fuels. So we understand very clearly where that concern is. And in regenerative agriculture, it's the synthetic inputs. So that number of 1.93 trillion, a lot of it is synthetic inputs. So again, we have to be very aware of that. Stabilization of energy prices and saving $85 per person per year in energy costs, that comes from the Solutions Project. Annual savings of 28.5 trillion in health and climate costs. Now, you might say, okay, it actually isn't an unexpected benefit. We did expect that there would be those benefits. But I think it's the size of the benefit that is very exciting from all of our perspectives. 28.5 trillion in health and climate costs savings. Now, in terms of the economic impacts, if you look at this graph at the bottom, what we're This was something that was published not so long ago, and you can see the blue line is the green economy, and the red line is fossil fuels. Now the green economy here now is representing $4 trillion, and it's growing massively. Albeit in the green economy we have much more than just energy. We also have agriculture, food, and so on. But the trend is there. And in terms of the economy, the new green economy of the future that is growing exponentially is renewables, plant-based foods, sustainable agriculture, electrify everything, etc. And that comes to us from the Exponential Climate Action Roadmap. And in terms of social, I'll just mention just a few quickly, also because of just how massive they are. In terms of from the Solutions Project, for instance, again, net increase of over 24 million long-term jobs, an annual decrease in 4.7 million premature deaths from air pollution, and 30 million people currently working in the energy sector, with permanent, well-paid jobs, etc., and an additional 12 million new jobs, and that comes from the One Earth climate model. And another example of that is the increased access to distributed energy by up to 4 billion people. So I leave to you also.
Just 2 minutes on scaling up. It's really important.
Okay, all right. Well, actually, I sort of wanted to turn this question up to you as well, if you'd like. But that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of the panelists. So, 2 announcements. First is we started a little bit late, so I would like us to go to 5 past, if you don't mind. And second, I would like to take all the questions you might have now and then turn to the panel and give them the floor to answer the questions, but also to react maybe to other panelists' points. Maybe we allow Alex to finish his list of 10. So the floor is yours. Questions? There. Okay. Sorry, we have to.
Yes, my question is for Mr. Moorhead. It's about agriculture. You pointed that a change in agriculture would be a major contribution against climate change. But what do you call exactly regenerative agriculture? Is that similar to agroecology or organic farming? And how can you make this transition when you see that the trend today is exactly opposite with agro-business and so on?
Hi, thank you very much for your interesting interventions. I have a question around the emphasis on individual action over collective action. In terms of what you've specified as being solutions, it's sort of big industry. And I wondered about us as individual consumers and individual responsibility, linking to your benefits about better connection to one another, responsibility to one another, care for one another. Could you expand a bit upon any visions for how we can form more inclusive societies, more equal societies, where particularly focusing a bit more on our Western consumption behaviour that's addressed. Thanks.
Thank you, Fleur. Another one here.
Just a question on the solutions that are linked to the SDGs and development. So I'm concerned that the international community would say then, well, we're doing this. We're investing in girls' education. We have SDGs. So therefore, we're doing climate action. And I want the message to be, well, we need more urgent investment in all of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Yes. Thank you.
Anywhere in the schemes which we've heard about, is there a mention of the unique place of national security, the traditional military kind? Just one or two factoids. Nuclear production of nuclear weapons and power plants is one of the most enormous discrete sources of pollution and forever pollution on our planet. the U.S. Army, the U.S. military is, I think, the largest single institution, entity of pollution in America. In this town, International Geneva, things to do with disarmament and arms control have their own little world. And they just sort of squeaked into the SDGs in SDG 16, very, very mildly. But is there anywhere in the schemes where the collision between the needed action and the old habits of sums of money of the same scale you've been mentioning? $1 trillion is going to the U.S. nuclear program in the next 30 years. So the same kinds of zeros are being used there, and I don't think we can do both. But that collision between habits of the 20th century and necessities of the 21st, I think, is somewhere a tough nut to crack.
Thank you very much. Any other questions, comments? Yes, here.
I really do admire your optimism, but there is an elephant in the room, which is economic growth and population growth. And this young girl, Mrs. Tunberg, has been mentioned a couple of times, and she was reported to have said that she has no expectations of the people in Davos. And I would join her, because the people in Davos, they are only there to increase their profits and to increase economic growth. And economic growth is always material. So if you increase consumption and production, then we increase the impact on the environment. And I could talk for a long time. There's one thing I would like to mention. I think it can be arguably, that this world cannot run on electricity. And if you want to make solar panel farms instead of farms, where are you going to grow the food? We don't need electricity. We have too much electricity. We have too much energy. We create too much. We should relocalize, reduce transportation, etc., etc., etc. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. There's a question there in the back.
So I actually had two. The first was going on the same line on the economic growth. Mr. Niggli, you mentioned circular economy, but it could be interesting to develop that into the new thinking on donut economics, and I was wondering if you were familiar with that and how you would evolve donut economics, or whoever else on the panel. And then the second is, it's interesting that you started off with having a disease, coughing, and then as a person, and then as the world is coughing. As a trained lung doctor, I just think it's very interesting, and we know that in this discussion, the health actors are not actually vocalized or having much space to speak on it. And also, you also highlighted the inequalities and where a lot of the hotspots are happening, where humanitarian actors are working. As a medical humanitarian actor, I was wondering what you think, where the voice of both the medics and the humanitarians should be and could be in this narrative.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? I can see one there. I just wanted to finish okay, here and there and three. Okay, excellent. Okay, please keep them short. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you substantially. Among millions of new jobs created, yes, we will lose some jobs. And among other jobs who will be created, there is also green jobs. What we should keep as a job. Natural risk, natural disasters. Among climate change, there is also a risk of natural disasters, but there is also a program for reducing the risk, natural disasters. And nowadays there is climate change services, which is managing by WMO, the global framework. But nowadays we talk also about ecosystem benefit, which is a concept in the CBD. But who, if there is a benefit, if there is an expected benefit, who will be, how can we manage, how can we share the benefit among who are less responsible can have more benefit, or more responsibility can got. This is my idea.
Thank you very much. There's a question here in the middle and then in the back.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to ask you, how do you believe that we can get world leaders? We mentioned Davos a few times. How can we get world leaders to act when we don't have a real system for political accountability in the world? That was just my main point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'd like to go back to economic growth and basically a question, I guess, to John. How solid would you say that the financial numbers that you presented are? Because, I mean, I'd like to believe in this, but if those numbers are correct, then basically this should be a non-issue, right? And even the people in Davos should be running out there and invest a lot of money in this, because your slides show that this actually is a positive NPV thing. Thank you.
And last but not least, here in the first row.
Yes, thank you. First of all, many thanks for all your optimism. Second, I wonder how you will be able to answer all these questions, because the list is really long. So maybe you will remember just one, the last one. No, more seriously, you took the image of a house in fire. And somehow, as far as we can see, I believe it's the case. I mean, there is an urgency. We have 12 years ahead of us to do action. So in the case of a house in fire, it's quite simple. First, as you mentioned, you call the fire brigade. But in our case, obviously we tried to call the fire brigade, but first we lost the number, and second, there is no fire brigade, because governments are too slow because of many reasons. So we have to take care of this situation on our own. And in the case of the house in fire, it's quite simple. You try to get water and to get your belongings. I mean, you have simple solutions. In the case of climate actions, obviously it's much more complicated. So somehow, my question to you, I know it will, to all of you, it's not an easy one. Can you give, being part of the communities that really care about this problem, simple solutions for people that can implement us in everyday life? Because in the case of fire, you know what you have to do. In that case, it's much more complicated. And I need this message is urgent. Otherwise, if we wait for the fire brigade, we will meet again, but by 2100. And the house will be definitely burned. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so there is indeed a very big, a very long list of questions. We will start with John, then go to Alexander, who might maybe give us the rest of his points, and we will finish with Nicola. Thank you.
Okay, your point is very valid about remembering all of them, but I'll do my best, and maybe there's a chance for a second round. No, not really. Okay, all right. Okay, so agriculture, regenerative agriculture. So what it's about. Now I'm not an agronomist. But basically, regenerative agriculture, as I understand it, is, as opposed to intensive industrial monoculture, is the rotating crops. It's no tillage. It's conservation agriculture. It's multi-level agroforestry, et cetera, et cetera. So it's basically in that process, as opposed to intensive with extensive use of fertilizers and pesticides, which somehow short-term create a more fertile soil, but longer-term decarbonize the soil. So it's turning agriculture, as opposed to how it's practiced today, where it produces greenhouse gas emissions, to a massive a carbon sink. If it's done right, we need to recarbonize the soil and get the CO2 from that. Growth. You mentioned growth a lot, and you talked about Davos and why everybody isn't doing drawdown solutions today, and so on and so forth. Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. So, first of all, regarding the numbers that Drawdown produces, they make abstraction of pricing externalities or a carbon price. Okay, so that's basically, if you look at the solar farm numbers, what it's saying is that over the next 30 years, it's cheaper to just have a solar farm as opposed to the old-fashioned way. So it's always compared to a business as usual scenario. The main reasons I would say that this isn't happening is there are two main reasons. One is the vested interest, and the fact that climate change is actually either the biggest market failure or absence of a market, because all the externalities are not integrated. So there's an IMF paper that came out that rather than subsidies, they were talking about 5 trillion that society has as costs every year because of fossil air pollution and so on and so forth. So that's a massive free lunch that every year all of us are giving to fossil fuels. So it's an unequal market. But the reason that it will grow exponentially is simply a question of efficiency. What markets like tremendously is efficiency. And it's more efficient rather than digging out the fossil fuel from the earth, transporting it, refining it, and delivering it. It's much more efficient just to get the energy straight from your roof. And so that's going to be rewarded. Same thing for plant-based foods, etc., etc. It was a question about population growth, but I don't want to. I have two. Okay, two more minutes. Okay. So population growth, and I'd like to link that also to the point you were making and the question that was asked also about educating girls. So there's 62 million girls that are out of school today. And that, in terms of, apart from the fact that it's obviously a crime against humanity to have all those girls not at school. But basically, educating girls means that they will, of course, have much healthier lives. They will have much more, they will master their own lives and their own destiny, and they'll be much more productive vis-a-vis their community and so on and so forth. And as you mentioned, three less children later in life, which means 830 odd million less inhabitants by 2050. So that's where it's a win-win-win-win-win for everybody. Let's see. There was some questions about responsibility and shared responsibility, resilience, adaptation versus mitigation, and so on, and everyday life actions that you can take. So regarding that, what I would say, and that's what I find is very exciting about all these solutions, is that it's not just about reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
Where the people that are responsible for that, that's the consumers, but the ones that are in charge of all these slaughterhouses, do everything they can not to film it, and do everything they can to have the piece of meat on your plate not look like an animal, because it was actually it is a dead animal that is on your plate if you're eating that. So it's better for your health, it's better for the health of those animals that preferably should not be given that life, and if they are alive, just keep them alive in a normal way as you would treat your dog or your cat. And it is one of the best things you can actually do to save our planet. because you put as much as about 30 times as much energy into an animal than you get out of it when you eat that animal. Not to use the word meat here, because that's what we're talking about. So I don't even remember when I became vegetarian. That's long time ago. I actually moved practically completely to plant-based. There might be some food where an egg is used or something. But I actually feel better by doing it. So just try to convince you with these arguments. There are some interesting videos. Just Google a bit on how the animals that you're eating, how they are treated. It might convince you to stop that. Waste is another one. When you talk about what you can do yourself, I'm shocked that now since a while we have to separate our waste in, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 different things. I'm shocked in my own behavior how much plastic I throw away. My restmüll, whatever you call it, that is like I can hold it in my hands. It's maybe a few bottle caps. But if I look at the amount of plastic, it is just so much. When I go to a supermarket to shop my food, I try not to buy plastic. I bring my own plastic bags to put my apples in or whatever, or even cotton bags. But it's so difficult to buy less plastic. But we're all consumers. We're powerful. When the consumers unite and start demanding that we have either degradable plastic, which is not real plastic, the kind of semi-plastic that is made from plants, etc., as they have nowadays, we should, as consumers, unite and be more forceful. Where I live in Södermalm in Stockholm, which is a very progressive area well, Stockholm is already progressive, and then within that you have a more progressive part where all the journalists and the artists live, and that's Södermalm. I can eat veggie food wherever I want. There's not one restaurant that does not offer it, because they would immediately go bankrupt, because they would lose like 20-30% of their clients. So when we grow in numbers, we can do much more. I got 3 more minutes. I'm going to use them. Then use less. Put your heating lower in your house, isolate your house. A lot of things is not about doing things different, just doing them less. Use your car less. Get on the bicycles that are actually good for your house as well. Briefly on the military production side. Yes, the military industry is by nature built to destroy things, and accidentally they've destroyed quite a bit of environment as well. Yes, that is absolutely true. I've worked many years on the landmines problem, that's why I've brought me over to Geneva. But it is the military, surprisingly, especially the American military, that were the first to come to arms, so to say, about the environment. That they said, the environment is also a threat for us. There's a future security threat, and the Pentagon was actually very progressive there. Actually, they're relatively still progressive to present-day American standards. Not sure after the latest minister that left how things are at this moment, but until a couple of weeks ago they certainly were. The military have also, they are, even if they don't want to be green, or apart from whether or not they want to be green, even for their own interest, it is often good to move into this kind of new economy. If you have forces deployed far out in the field in Afghanistan, you lose, if you want to bring big trucks with fossil fuels there, you lose an enormous amount of manpower and money in protecting them, in making sure that they are not being blown up or whatever is happening to it. Whereas if you would just once go there and put down their solar panels, you have much more manpower to do the job while they are actually there. And there's a lot of these kind of progressive things taking place there, and including in the US Navy is also very progressive in thinking about it. there's a lot happening in that field, which brings me to a more general point that was raised a few times when you talk about the economy and about those that are in Davos. Well, actually, quite a lot of them actually do the right thing. I think a beautiful example is Paul Polman of Unilever, that has shown that it is actually commercially very interesting to become more sustainable. If you, let's say, reduce your packaging, then you need less. Yeah, you gave me 20 more seconds. If you use less packaging, then you have you use less materials, so there's less that you have to transport. Then ultimately you have a lightweight product and you have less waste at the end of the day. So you earn money and you do something good for the environment. And there are so many of these promising examples, and those in Davos have woken up to that opportunity. This is the low-hanging fruit. As with our votes for the right people, we have to force them to take a next step, because just picking the low-hanging fruit is not enough, certainly not in the 12 years left. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexander. So we did start 10 minutes later. We are going to start 10 minutes, and the last minutes go to...
Thank you so much, Anna. And thanks for the great questions. I would like to start with this point you made, Alexander, about the heroes, and I think that sort of responds to one of the questions that has been posed about what can we do individually, where are the heroes in this story. And we do mention this 16-year-old Swedish girl, but as I said in the beginning, I think there are so many more people out there. And I think we all can be, and to a certain extent have to be, heroes in this story. And there have been examples given here on how we can act. But I think we have to also, and this is Geneva, that should be Geneva's obsession, but it should also be everybody's individual obsession. How can we create leverage into this story? How can we individually change our habits, but also convince others to do the same? This is how larger streams essentially start. And the more heroes we have in this story, the better it will go. I think from that point of view, we also need to learn, I hate to say it, from the people who are in charge of public relations and marketing departments. In my opinion, we have to make climate change mitigation and resilience and changing habits and doing the right thing way more sexy. Way more sexy. And I really hate to use that term, because that's not the way I'm sort of thinking about things, but that's the point. We have to make it fashionable. People have to feel great about doing that right thing. And once you have that attitude, you're more passionate about it, and you speak out more about it, and here we go. Interesting about the leak, Zuckerberg. We spoke about social media and spreading the word. Zuckerberg once, I think a few years ago, came up with one of his personal challenges, and I think he decided to sort of kill every animal he would eat. Pretty, extreme, but I think he did it for a year. At least that's what he claims he did. The bottom line is, I think his meat consumption, diminished by about 95 or 6 or 7%. Here we go. But again, I think the key here is to create leverage, to act on our own, but also to really think about, creating a movement and to scale up. That should be our obsession, and Geneva can be really good at it by creating these platforms, but also by, in my opinion, working on what is a key element of this ecosystem, working on the standards, the taxonomies. It's still too simple, and I think that's why it doesn't grow more quickly from a business point of view. It's still too simple to essentially claim you're selling an apple, while you're selling something else. Greenwashing, or social washing, or governance washing. And we have the tools here. We have the SGS, we have ISO and others. We have the world's most impressive specialists in this field. Why don't we come up with very good standards and people work on this? So it's not as if I'm sort of like suggesting something that doesn't happen. Why don't we just accelerate this work on standards? Because whenever you can measure precisely, you will be able to act more quickly. And that brings me to the question about donut economies. And I'm sorry, I didn't hear you the word donut before. I guess I have some sort of a, I'm not hearing anything having to do with too much sugar. And so the word donut has essentially escaped me in the beginning, but thank you for repeating it. I'm not so sure the economy is completely broken. I just think that the externalities, as others have said here on the panel, the externalities have just not been properly been accounted for. And once again, I think there is opportunity here. It's just that we have to reconcile, and I think that's the beauty of this challenge and the beauty of the opportunity. I think we have the opportunity to reconcile morals and profit. Again, I just come back with very simple numbers. This commission, how is it called? The Business and Sustainable Development Commission, a few years ago, has calculated that up to 2030, there are about $12 trillion in investment necessary to change our infrastructures, to change our business models, to just essentially transit from the old world to the new world. So this is a lot of jobs, this is a lot of investment opportunities, this is a lot of profitability in the making. And again, I think we have at the end of the day to work together. Blended finance, how the state works together with private financial companies is on the rise, very much so. This is something we have to welcome. What else did I want to say? Security. After all, we are at the GCSP. And that brings me to the military point. I'm not having any answer on the pollution of nuclear defense systems and nuclear energy in general. All I can say is, if we do not act, if we do not bring our act together, there will be enormous amounts of disruption. I happen to have traveled a lot and worked with people from all over the world the last close to 20 years, and I've spent a lot of time in Asia. When India and Pakistan were separated, about 60 million people had to move across the new border. And you know, having read the history books, I'm sure, that this was pretty bloody and pretty messy. Think about the situation with climate refugees and shortages of water and other resources. The whole area around the sea in Asia, between South Asia and East Asia, it's about 3 to 3.5 billion people who might at a certain stage be displaced. Think about the challenge this represents in terms of, and I'm not even saying here management, just like coping, barely coping. I think it's something we have no idea how to manage. And that brings me back to security. Anything we do to change that trajectory, to limit the damage, I don't think, again, as I said in the beginning, that we can reverse it, but if we can limit it, if we can train our resilience capacity, find innovative ways to sort of change that trajectory of time, it will just make the world so much less insecure. And that, by definition, will probably limit, hopefully at least, our spending on even more military capacity. that's not how I want to spend the money. I think we have to spend it differently. But once again, I think I just have to start from what is realistic and then just get it one step forward. One more minute, one more point. Is a company the best in the world, or is it the best for the world? I think this question is still asked too many times. And I think we cannot afford to choose. We have to be good, that's how the system works, but we can't just be good in terms of profit the old way. We have to look at the social dimension, and this brings me really back to the concept developed in the book Drawdown Economy. I think we have to have that moral element ingrained, and what I see day in, day out, speaking with young entrepreneurs, I have to say gives me quite a bit of hope, because there is a bit of a shift. I would even say a massive shift in the way people think. I encounter lots of people who essentially want to give back, to just cash in some of the profit for themselves, to reinvest it. There is a movement out there, but again, we all have to be the heroes of this story. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicola. And before we thank our panelists, I wanted to do it in person. Nicola, Alexander, and John, it was really an excellent and very, very insightful discussion. I know that there are some questions that are still not answered, so I would encourage you to contact the speakers via social media and ask them these questions. They will be happy to answer them. To spread the news, this public discussion is going to be available on the GCSP YouTube channel, so if you want to share it with your colleagues, with your friends, with your family, by all means please do this. And I wanted to thank you all, the public, for your attention, for your questions, and I hope to see you back at the GCSP very soon. Thank you so much.